When the comic Watchmen by writer Alan Moore was published in 1986, it took the world by surprise. Far from presenting us with a typical superhero story, Moore gave us a very complex story full of metaphors, recurring symbols, and overlapping plot arcs that managed to revolutionize the entire superhero genre in a single comic, showing us the potential of the comic as a medium. That's why in this video we will analyze one of the strongest themes within this story, a metaphor developed by Moore between the panels, the arguments, and even the very title of the comic. My name is Go the Geek Monitor, and today we will analyze the metaphor of time, the clock, and the watchmaker. We are in the year of 1985. Dr. Jonathan Osterman, better known as Dr. Manhattan, is on Mars. He is 56 years old. He is looking at the stars. It's 1945. Jonathan is sitting in a Brooklyn kitchen, fascinated by the pieces of a clock on black velvet. Meanwhile, in 1959, he is introduced to a girl named Janie. She offers him a beer. It's the first time someone has done that for him. When she hands him the cold glass, their fingers touch. Examples like this, where Alan Moore plays with time in a poetic way, abound within this story. And precisely, time, its perception, and the way in which humans measure it, that is the clock, are main gears of the great machinery that is Watchmen. Chapter 1. The Clock. The clock is one of the recurring symbols in this comic, which appears throughout the story with various meanings. Here, first of all, we see it in the title Watchmen, which is a play on words that can be translated as the Watchers and the Clockmen. You probably already knew this, but the interesting thing here is that both translations have a useful meaning for the story. The Watchers refers to the phrase quis custodiet ipsus custodes, which is commonly translated as who watches the watchers, a phrase written by the Latin poet Juvenal. Although originally the phrase referred to not being able to trust another man to take care of your wife, today this phrase speaks to us about the abuse of power and the fact that you cannot grant absolute power to any person or institution. This is reflected throughout the entire history of Watchmen, in the police brutality of the comedian, the apparent absolute power of Dr. Manhattan, and mainly in governments who can cause the end of the world through a nuclear war by just pressing a button. This leads me to Alan Moore's use of something known as the Doomsday Clock or the Apocalypse Clock, an image that we can see throughout the comic book covers. This clock first appeared in real life in 1947 in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, a magazine created by several members of the Manhattan Project, the project that was responsible for developing the atomic bomb. And yes, as a fun fact, Dr. Manhattan gets his name from here. The Doomsday Clock was created by these scientists with the intention of warning the world about the dangers of their creations, as they felt a social responsibility after their atomic bomb was used in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This clock counts the minutes before midnight, which would supposedly mean global extinction. Over the years, the hands of the clock have been changing, moving closer or further away from midnight, depending on the global situation. In this case, Ozymandias was aware that the end of the world was approaching. He was the only one who could see this clock and decided to do something about it. And it turns out that the clock as a physical object also plays a role within the story of Watchmen. Jonathan Osterman was fascinated with clocks when he was a teenager. Years later, he repaired his girlfriend's clock and then forgot it inside the chamber that gave him his powers. The nuclear bomb metaphorically stopped time in the city of Hiroshima, as we see on the cover of this magazine. Meanwhile, Osterman's father realized that clocks were useless, throws the parts out the window, and forces his son to study atomic physics. Finally, Watchmen in a way works like a big clock. It's a story full of synchronized situations, present, past, and future, that moves like machinery. However, not only the clock plays a role in this comic, but also the concept of time itself. Chapter 2. the time. If we want to understand this chapter better, we first have to agree on the definition of time, because it turns out it has several definitions. Here, first of all, it is the physical magnitude with which we measure the duration and separation of two events, which allows us to have an order in life, that is, a present, a past, and a future. For example, I first spent my time working, 15 days later I got paid, and an hour later I spent it all on comics without caring about a future in which I will die alone. See, time serves to order things and depress us a little along the way. It turns out that for many years, various artists and writers have experimented with different ways of representing time in comics, as it is much more complicated than it seems. Have you ever wondered how long a panel like this lasts? Could it possibly be a second? 10? 5 minutes? If we look at this panel along with others on the same page, maybe we can get an idea, since we see Rorschach performing various actions and our mind unconsciously calculates the time it would take us to do them. But it turns out there are many tricks that artists use to make scenes last as long as the writer wants them to last. For example, the panels can be longer, there can be several panels with the same image, we can have borderless panels, etc. However, the most used resource to give time to a comic panel lies in the text. Observe this panel without text. It can last as long as you want. Now add a text and the panel at least has to last as long as it would take a person to say this text in a similar situation to this one. Quite creative, don't you think? It turns out that in the Watchmen comic, Moore uses this resource with the difference that he takes it to another level, as throughout the story he uses the same text for two completely different situations. Let's take these scenes as an example. Here's the text. Are you ready to deal with hostilities? It could refer to Dr. Manhattan's interview or to Daniel and Laurie about to face some criminals. The scene where Rorschach tells the Pagliacci clown joke overlaps with the scene of the comedian crying regretfully about his life, but the greatest use of text overlay comes with Tales of the Black Frighter, the pirate comic within the Watchmen comic that progresses parallel to the same story and joins in several scenes thanks to the text. This resource not only gives us the impression of traveling through space, but also through time and through parallel stories. Through the use of the word, Moore manages to give us the impression of living the past, the present, and the future at the same time, in the same way as Dr. Manhattan. The second concept of time is a bit more difficult to understand, but it's important because it turns out that Alan Moore plays with both concepts at the same time in this comic. It turns out that time is also a dimension. And well, to all this, what the hell is a dimension? And here to explain it, I will use the help of my cartoon friend Rorschach, who for some not strange reason is in a classroom. As we can see, he can move forward and backward in the room, sideways, and with the help of a ladder he could also move up and down. That is, he can move in 3 dimensions and his position can be represented by coordinates. It turns out that time is the 4th dimension, and although Cartoon Rorschach may not realize it, he is also moving in time. In fact, we all do. The only difference is that we are slaves to time, as we cannot decide where to move. We always move forward towards the future. Everyone except Dr. Manhattan. So, if you combine the 3 dimensions of space with the 4th dimension, which is time, you can know the absolute position of anything at any point in time. This is known as space-time. Now you can understand why Marty McFly wasn't thinking about the 4th dimension. Thank you very much for helping me with the explanation, Cartoon Rorschach. Now you can die in peace so I can explain the last part of this metaphor. Chapter 3. The Watchmaker. If you ever found a bunch of watch parts thrown on the floor, you wouldn't be able to reassemble them, as you couldn't see the order behind all that chaos unless you have the special skills of a watchmaker. Jonathan Osterman's father was one of them, and even though he didn't want his son to become a watchmaker, eventually Dr. Manhattan did become one, with the difference that he had the ability to find the order behind the chaos of many things, not just watches. Manhattan is the only character who is not obliged to move forward in time. However, his fate is much worse, as he is in all time at the same time. We can say that he doesn't move at all. It's as if he's a photograph of himself that exists in all parts of his life at the same time, a frozen person. Do you remember that scene where Manhattan says there's only one photograph of him? Well, Moore actually used the photograph as a metaphor for Dr. Manhattan's situation here. The comic tells you that Manhattan doesn't change future events like the assassination of John F. Kennedy, because for him they've already happened. Can you imagine then how frustrating it must be for him to see the bars of the cage of time without being able to change its course or do something to prevent it? If we look closely in the story, we can see how Dr. Manhattan tries to escape from the prison of time on a couple of occasions. For example, when he was bothered by his partner Janie Slater aging, Manhattan sought a younger version to replace her. Unable to move Janie back in time, he sought a substitute with whom he unconsciously tried to cheat time. But that's not all. When Manhattan travels to Mars, he doesn't do it simply because he wants to be alone, but because he wants to escape from time itself. In fact, in the comic he says, "I've gone to Mars. I've gone to a place without clocks, without seasons, without hourglasses to trap the shifting pink sand." It's true that Dr. Manhattan is a very powerful character, but power comes with a price. For him, approaching the fact of being a god or a watchmaker stripped him of all his humanity. Let's say that the more he saw the great machinery of the clock of life, the less he cared about people. He didn't care that comedian killed a pregnant woman in front of him, just as he didn't care if our planet was consumed by nuclear war. It's like viewing our world from space. From Mars, our planet makes sense. It's a sphere floating peacefully in the solar system. The closer you get, the more you realize the beautiful and terrible chaos that exists behind all of it. So if Manhattan and the Watchmaker are an analogy for God, could it be that Moon is trying to tell us that the gods are so far away from us that we really can't matter to them? Well, as we can see throughout the 12 volumes of the Watchmen comic, Alan Moore functions in a certain way as a watchmaker, organizing and arranging events throughout the past, present and future, in which all the pieces come together to form a story of epic proportions. Through a creative use of the word, Moon made us live several times at the same time, and through characters like Dr. Manhattan, we come to the realization that not even characters who seem like gods can begin to understand the immense chaos that is life. For me, the high point of the comic comes with the epiphany that Dr. Manhattan arrives at, in which each one of us is a thermonuclear miracle, because the chances of each one of us existing here and now are practically impossible. We are as impossible as turning air into gold, and yet here we are. The world is so full of miracles that we sometimes tend to forget it. As Albert Einstein said, after helping to develop the knowledge that made the Manhattan Project possible, which made the atomic bomb possible, which made the Watchmen comic possible, the release of atomic power has changed everything except our way of thinking. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of humanity. Had I known this, I would have become a watchmaker. While re-recording the voice for this video, which I originally uploaded in 2017, I realized how much it means to me. For starters, it's the video that made me stay on YouTube. I'd been uploading content for about 2 years, but the content was very different from what we see now on the channel. The content resembled 10 things you didn't know about this character, or everything you need to know before watching X series movie. It was more content that you could find in other places. And the truth is that it wasn't something that was working. Not only was the number of views bad, but it was going up. I uploaded it because I thought it was going up. I uploaded it because I thought that was the way to talk about comics on YouTube. I mean, I thought people wanted to see that kind of content and only that kind of content. Later on, I realized that it wasn't what I wanted because I like to see superheroes from a different perspective. I like to see them more like these videos I make now. So, as I thought before completely retiring from YouTube, I decided to release a couple of videos in this style, not for people to watch them, but simply to get them out of my system. It was something I wanted to do. So, these three videos were one about Wonder Woman and feminism, another about the ideology of Batman and Superman in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns comic, and the Watch and the Watchmaker. And well, it turns out that a couple of days after I uploaded this Watchmen video, I started getting notifications and notifications and notifications of that I was getting subscribers and that there were people commenting on my videos, something that never happened. In fact, I thought that maybe some page had shared my video, because suddenly I was getting a lot of messages of, hey, I like this content, what a good video. Especially I realized that there were a lot of people who wanted to see superheroes in this way, that there was an audience for this type of superhero videos. What I did then was find my style of videos. I mean, I found the way I see superheroes. So really the way I see superheroes. So really I always say that this Watchmen video changed my life. Also, the truth is that 2017 was a very bad year for me, not only because of the Justice League, the one by Joss Whedon, but because my dad was sick most of that year. Fortunately, he is fine now, but I do remember very well that the positive reaction to that video was like a ray of light in that damn 2017, and the truth is that it made me feel very good. And not only that, it turns out that Watchmen is like in my top 5 favorite comics of all time. And I'm going to confess something, I find it very hard to sit down and write about a product that I love so much, because I'm afraid that what I write, my words, won't do justice to the great affection I feel for this product. As is the case with Watchmen, as is the case with Sandman, as is the case with the Avatar cartoon. So that's why I don't have videos on my channel about comics that I really like. Like Kingdom Come or All-Star Superman, I still haven't dared to talk about them, but it turns out that with this Watchmen video I did there, and it was one of those rare times when I said everything I wanted to say in the way I wanted to say it, and say in the order in which I wanted to say it. Something that, well, doesn't happen very often. But I like to think that there are other videos on my channel that did reach this level, like the one of Megamind, Avatar and Sandman, and as I already mentioned, Keanu Reeves and recently the one of the Snyder Cut are videos of which I feel very proud. So well, fortunately after 4 years here I am. And as many of you know, due to the contingency this year, I am fully dedicated to my channel, and it is something that makes me very happy. But I am also especially grateful to you who helped me get here. Now we are 250,000 subscribers. Believe me that all the content is always made with a lot of love and dedication, so thank you for being here. My name is Go, the Geek Monitor, and keep looking beyond the obvious. Thank you.